Hi writers, today I'm talking about the negative psychological effects of procrastination. Now the first thing you need to know, if you are a procrastinator, if you suffer from procrastination, when I talk about procrastination in this video, I'm going deeper. Procrastination is not just putting something off. That's usually how it's looked at by writers in our society overall. People think of procrastination as you're just putting something off that you don't want to do. And usually you're putting it off because you're dreading doing it, or you're lazy, or you're unmotivated. You can't get it together. This is what most writers think. It's just putting something off. It's not that big of a deal. However, procrastination, especially the type of procrastination I'm talking about in today's video, comes with specific emotional symptoms. The procrastination I'm talking about that really paralyzes writers comes with dread, anxiety, a high level of anxiety usually, resistance, stubbornness or rebellious feelings even, and most importantly, guilt and shame. This type of procrastination, when it shows up in writers, follows a specific cycle. First, the writer knows that there's something they have to do, usually writing their book, either starting the book, continuing work on the book, finishing the book, what have you. There's some sort of writing work that they know they want to get done and they know they have to get it done. They feel guilt and shame over not getting it done. That's the first symptom in the cycle. They feel guilt and shame. And so they make promises to themselves. I'll do it next week, or I'll make it my New Year's resolution, or I'll join a program this summer and I'll for sure get it done then. I'll wait until I'm on vacation. I'll have lots of time. Then I'll get it done. I won't worry about it now. I'll worry about it this weekend, right? So there's this sort of inner promising to themselves. I'll do it when this other thing happens and it becomes easier. So they make these promises to themselves, which help a little bit in the short term. Usually after making the promise, the writer does feel better. Okay, it's been taken care of. I have a plan. I have a goal. I'm going to do it. However, as that date looms nearer and nearer, and we come up to it in the future, we come up to that weekend, we come up to next summer, the new year is well underway, and it's not getting done, or the writer is feeling that dread and resistance again, the dread and the anxiety and the resistance really start to amp up. They start to really get going, and they can feel very strong, especially the anxiety. So what happens is that date comes to pass. The weekend, the summer, whatever it was, whenever it was, the writer was supposed to do it. It comes up, the writer doesn't do it, they don't follow through, and then they're right back to guilt and shame. Usually at a lower level than they were even at before. They feel even more guilt and more shame because they didn't do the thing that they promised themselves they would do, and they feel worse about themselves. So over time, this whole cycle, it repeats itself over and over again. And I've talked to writers who have been stuck in this type of procrastination for years, even decades. As it repeats over the long term, this damages the writer's self-esteem. They begin to have very low self-esteem, and they begin to experience feelings of distrust for themselves and distrust for any sources of outside help. So they start to believe there's no hope for me, nothing can help me, I can't trust any promises I make to myself, and I can't trust any promises that someone makes to help me from the outside. I have zero trust for any of that. And then this contributes to the overall feeling of hopelessness, right? I'm a failure, it's futile, there's never going to be an end in sight to this. This is just going to be the cycle of my life. So the solution, most writers think the solution is pushing themselves harder, is beating themselves up more, is letting their inner critic have free rein. Because the inner critic comes in and almost promises that they will really make things better. They tell the writer what you need is discipline, what you need is accountability, you're really lazy, you're unmotivated, you've always been like this, you can't be trusted. You need to listen to me. I see how lazy you are. I see the truth. I see how undisciplined you are. If you let me whip you into shape, that's when things will get better. And so sometimes the writer will really go for this, like, oh, my inner critic knows what they're talking about. If I just listen to my inner critic, things will get better. However, I can say nothing ever gets better by listening to your inner critic. Your inner critic actually doesn't know what it's talking about. And the more shame you heap on yourself, which is what the inner critic does, it heaps guilt and shame on you. The more shame that you heap on yourself, the lower you go. The more your energy drains, the more hopeless you feel, and the less energy you have of pulling yourself out of this cycle. So things really do truly become hopeless when you let your inner critic take over and have free reign because of this. The solution is not to push yourself harder, and it's not to let your inner critic take over and take control. The solution is actually to acknowledge first that this is an emotional cycle you are in with psychological effects. You are not lazy. You are not unmotivated. You are not spacey or flaky. I hear this a lot of the time, especially for those writers who struggle with ADHD as well. They say, I'm so flaky, I'm so spacey, I can't follow through. You are not a failure. None of that is true. All of that is an illusion. When you use words like that inside your own mind, lazy, unmotivated, spacey, flaky, failure, whatever it is, you are judging yourself. And you are judging yourself as defective. There's something wrong with you, and you are the problem. You're not suffering with a problem. You're not suffering from a problem. You are the problem. And that's really the energy of shame. Guilt is you are doing something wrong. Shame is you are wrong. And it's very hard to come back from that. So that's the first step that we want as we're working towards a solution with procrastination. That first step is we want to acknowledge that we are not the problem. We are in an emotional cycle that has psychological effects. And any other human being who is in this emotional cycle goes through these same negative psychological effects. Any other human being, not just you, any other human being in this cycle of procrastination, this emotional cycle with the guilt and the shame and the dread and the anxiety and the resistance is going to suffer the same effects. Their self-esteem is also going to be damaged. They are also going to criticize themselves. They are also going to heap shame and judgment upon themselves, and they're going to end up feeling hopeless. So this is actually a really common cycle for writers who have a lot of anxiety around writing. You are not the problem, but the first step towards a solution is acknowledging that you are in an emotional cycle and it has negative psychological effects. This emotional cycle is taking a toll on you. So the next step is we want to see that, and then we really want to see that what we need is not more pushing. We don't need more forcing. Our inner critic is not helping. Our inner critic is not a helpful force in this type of situation. This type of writer problem needs healing. It doesn't need accountability. It doesn't need discipline. It doesn't need this sort of military boot camp style promise of a solution that you're just going to be pushed so hard from behind you will have no choice but to move forward sort of in a violent manner. If anything, that triggers even more anxiety because nobody likes to be pushed in that way, especially when we're already swirling around with feelings of guilt and shame and we're not good enough. This is a wound that needs to be healed. That is the real key here. This is something that needs to be healed, not something that needs to be forced. So those are the first steps. As we understand, okay, this is a wound I have, this needs to be healed. Whipping myself harder, that's not going to help. We then want to show ourselves self-compassion. We want to show ourselves self-compassion for what we're going through, and we want to release that shame and that guilt. Now, this is not going to happen overnight, and if you have been in this cycle for a long time, like I said, years or even decades, the feelings of shame and guilt might almost feel so familiar that at times they can feel comforting to your brain because your brain is really used to that program. Oh, I wanted to get that thing done. I promised myself I would. The date came up, the deadline that I promised myself I would get it done by. I didn't do it. Now I feel right back into shame and guilt. Now I feel like I'm a bad person. I can't get anything done. I'm lazy. That whole tape in my head is just repeating itself yet again. Because that tape has repeated itself so many times in the past, when you go into that loop again, it will almost feel like a security blanket. Oh, I'm here again. I'm feeling hopeless. I'm feeling shameful. I'm feeling guilty about my writing. I know what this is. I can deal with this. And in a way, for some writers, that's almost preferable to the anxiety of beginning to show self-compassion and beginning to do the healing work of healing this wound that is causing the procrastination, which can really feel like an inner shakeup. And when you already have anxiety, that can feel even more scary a lot of the time than just going back into the guilt and shame hole. So how do we heal the wound? That's our next question. If we're really serious, like, okay, I'm willing to move outside of my comfort zone. I'm willing to release the guilt and the shame, or at least work on releasing the guilt and the shame. How do I do that? How do I heal this wound of procrastination? We start by examining the fear behind the procrastination. There is always a really big, ugly, gnarly root of fear at any procrastination cycle for any writer. There's fear. That's what's causing this whole thing, a really deep fear. And that fear is entrenched in the wound. A really great way to start to examine this fear is to practice journal writing and start with some simple questions. So, what am I most afraid of? Why am I terrified to begin? What's behind my shame? When did my guilt start? Journal any memories that come up. Journal any images that come up. Journal any phrases that come up, song lyrics. Like, even if it doesn't make sense, whatever bubbles up in you after asking those questions, that's something to write down. And as you do this journal exercise, you can write the question at the top of the page, like, what am I most afraid of? And maybe you just sit and you just stare at that question and nothing comes for a few minutes. Nothing comes for 20 minutes. That's okay. You sitting with the question is still work. It's still healing work, even if you don't write one thing down. If this video was helpful to you, I do urge you to subscribe to my channel. I talk about all sorts of these kinds of topics, intuition, writing, highly sensitive writers, INFJs, INFPs, procrastination, perfectionism, being highly intuitive and highly creative at the same time. If any of this or all of this resonates with you, please subscribe to my channel. Please also subscribe to my newsletter. You can get a free gift geared specifically for highly sensitive writers, and check out my website. I have lots of resources for intuitive writers, like I said, INFJ, INFP personality type writers, being highly intuitive, highly creative at the same time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. I'll see you next time.